Hey there, it's Lýkos and welcome back to my channel. This week I didn't really have anything else planned, and it suddenly struck me that there has been a group of people asking me about the fact that I constantly talk about being a nerd and reading a lot, and I've never mentioned the books I read. And so there was a group of people who wanted to know what my favourite books were and sort of give suggestions on books, and I thought, you know, I've got nothing else to film for this week, why not make that this week's YouTube video? So yeah, I talk about reading a lot. I've grown up loving reading. I had a very advanced reading age at a young age. When I was in primary school, me and my friends had competitions on who could read the most books in the year. We were really strange kids. But that's still something I enjoy doing to this day, and so I'm going to talk about my favourite books. So if you follow me on Instagram, you probably know I have a very obscure obsession with H.P. Lovecraft. Like everything H.P. Lovecraft, like his books, any games based on him, the mythos, just everything Lovecraft related. And so that brings me to my top 2 favourite books at the moment, which I would suggest to anyone, are the complete collections of H.P. Lovecraft books. This one was not cheap, by all means, but it's well worth buying if you are specifically interested in the Cthulhu mythos, because it is just strictly that. And it's got all those stories in order of when they're meant to be read, with explanation at the beginning of what the mythos is and how it works and the rules of the mythos, as well as all of the original publication dates in the back of it. And it came with a poster of Cthulhu, so but yeah, if you're interested in horror, modern day or old school, I definitely suggest checking out H.P. Lovecraft novels or short stories if you haven't already, because he's basically the influence for a lot of modern day horror writers, and I can say that's fair play because he's a really good writer. The English can be a bit muddled occasionally in it because he was born in the late 1800s, and a lot of his books were released in the early 1900s, but if you're okay with reading things that have got a bit of a twist or words you may not understand and might have to Google, or not understand how to pronounce the words of the ancient ones a couple of times, then these are great books to get, and they may cost you a bit of money, but you get a lot of books in a lot of stories in the space of one book. So yeah, if you're a horror nerd like I am, I'd greatly suggest checking out H.P. Lovecraft. He's a really good writer, and yeah, because anyone knows that I've been obsessed with the game Call of Cthulhu at the moment because H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, and sticking on the same theme, I got this book in the UK. It's called The Mammoth Book of Cthulhu, and it's not actually by H.P. Lovecraft. It's all Lovecraftian fiction, so it's modern day writers using Lovecraftian style to create new stories for the cosmos to keep it going. And just because he had such an interesting way of writing, that there's an entire horror subgenre of Lovecraftian fiction as its own thing, and it's actually a really good read, and I've read it about 3 times now, and it's again a collection of short stories, but really good stories from maybe lesser known authors that you don't know of. I'm not even going to try to pronounce some of them because the ones listed on the back of the book don't have the easiest pronounced names, but I don't want to offend anyone, so I'm not going to try and pronounce the authors' names that are on the back as listed as include stories of, but it's a really good read, and it's something I definitely suggest checking out if you're into Lovecraftian fiction but want to read something more modern. things like Lovecraftian fiction books are really, really good, and I'm pretty sure there's a couple of these out there, but this is just the one I picked up in an HMV in the UK. So yeah, it was a really good find, and that was before I bought my actual H.P. Lovecraft book, so that was great. Sticking on more of a mythology theme, I have a theme of what I read, don't I? If you guys like Norse mythology, Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology book has basically all you need to know about the Norse gods and its mythology, but in maybe a more understandable way than what you can find online. You know, he's tried to modernize it and explain it from his point of view, and from the way he learned when he was studying, and it's actually a really good read. It's very interesting, and it's one of my favourite all-time books, and as you can see I'm rereading it at the moment. It's actually my dad's book, but I stole it off of him to read it again. Yeah, it's very worth the read. It's something I suggest to anyone who's interested in mythology. In fact, one of my friends recently bought it because I told them to. But yeah, it's definitely, if you're interested in the Norse gods, or even just Norse mythology with the tales and, you know, things like the story of the Midgard serpent, definitely a good read. Again, there is Norse names in it that might be a bit hard to pronounce if you like to read out loud like I do, but if you're okay with Googling how to pronounce things, it's a really good book to read. And on the only actual novel of this top books list is part of a series, and it's called The Enemy. It's a Charlie Hickson book. I got these gifted to me for maybe my 17th birthday, all 7 of them, and I read all of them very quickly. I first read The Enemy when I was like 13. Me and my friend found it in Wickles, and found one copy of it in Lýkos. She read it, I read it, then we gave it to my other friend who read it, and we could never find the rest of the series. And so when I told my aunt that I was on the hunt for the rest of the series, she found them online and bought all 7 of them for me for my birthday and sent them to me. So yeah, it's in the gist of the story. If you've never heard of this series, it's when was this published actually? I don't think it's a new book. It was first published in 2009. So it's not a brand new book series. It's, you know, it's a few years old now, but in the gist of it, I know a couple of years back on my Instagram I talked about the Gone series. If you know what that series is and you like that series, you'll love this series, because basically everyone over the age of 15 turns into a zombie-like creature, although they're not specifically zombies, and they explain the whole how it happened, and which is not something you commonly get in books, like how it affects the adults. And you also get chapters from the adults' perspective, who are the zombies, which I thought was a really interesting way to write it. There are 7 books in the series. None of them take place in order. So the first book takes place after the second book, and so on and so forth. So they're not really in an order. So you could pick one up and read it, but I suggest reading them from the order they were released, because they actually explain a lot more that way. But they're not in chronological order as in timeline. So yeah, this it's a really good read. I finished it really fast because I got really drawn into it. What I will say is don't get attached to any characters because it is an apocalyptic book and you never know what may happen on the next page. But it was something that I started reading and couldn't stop, because I found the concept of groups of 15-year-olds trying to survive in London by themselves with hordes of adults chasing after them to try and eat them really fascinating, and how they wrote it, because they don't write it like they're adults, they write it like they're kids. It was written from a perspective of a child. It wasn't written, oh we're young kids but we are all adult-like now. They're still kids, and they have groups with little kids in them that they have to look after. And it was a really interesting perspective on what I normally see in zombie books, because a lot of the apocalyptic books I normally read are from adults' perspectives, so it was just really interesting to find this a couple of years back. I think I first read it, like I said, when I was 14, so it would have been 2014 maybe. But it is one of the more interesting books and one of my favourite book series, so I had to include that in this list, although he's not my favourite author, so I don't have all of his books. I would definitely suggest checking out this series, and giving it a read if you're into apocalyptic books, because it's really interesting. And you know, I know that the Gone, I don't know if the Gone series was released before this or after this. I read the Gone series before this, but I know it's got the same style of writing as the Gone series, where in Gone everyone over the age of 15 disappears. It's much more of a threat to, in my opinion, to be fighting off everyone over the age of 15 when you're, you know, like a 10-year-old and they're in their late 40s and 4 times your height and 6 times your weight. I found that more interesting of a concept and more threatening than just disappearing, although I won't spoil the ending of Gone, because it does have a great plot twist, which is, if you haven't read the Gone series and you end up reading this one, or you have read this one, check that out as well. It's a fairly decent series. I just find this book series to be one of my favourites. So aside from my obsession with Lovecraft, this probably has to be one of my favourite books. If I have to pick the best thing I've read this year, it is a short story by H.P. Lovecraft, and I reread it recently, and it's called The Nameless City, and it's a 1921 release, and it has the first mention of the Mad Arab and the Necronomicon in the entire collection. So it's something I'm fascinated by is how they bring that up in the story. But yeah, I do have a lot more books. Like I said, I have all 7 of the Gone series. I wasn't going to bring them all through into my room because my books, aside from my H.P. Lovecraft books, none of my books are in my room anymore. I wasn't going to bring in all of my favourite books. I just thought I'd do the top books of that I've read in the last couple of months, or reread in the last couple of months. Because people wanted to know what it was I was talking about when I said I was going to read for the next 5 hours, and yeah, those are the books I've been rereading recently, that I have still got this obsession and fascination with. No matter how many times I read it, it's still just as good. And yeah, I know a lot of these books are horror themed or mythology themed, sorry. But if you're not into that, you'll probably have to find another person to give you book reviews or book suggestions, because that's basically all I read. One book I don't own that happens to be one of my favourite books of all time, but I haven't read in years because I got it from my school library, and that is While the Others Sleep. And I wish I could find a copy of it somewhere, because it is one of the best books I've ever read. It is a young adult's novel, so it's not exactly, you know, what I read nowadays with reading H.P. Lovecraft and stuff like that. But it's still just as great every time I see it. Yeah, that's like, if you can find that book, read it. I can't find it, and I wish I could. But it is a great book, and I won't give any of the plot away. If you find the book, read the back of it, or Google it and read the brief of it, because I know what happens, and I don't want to talk about it too much, because I don't want to spoil it, because it does have one of the greatest plot twists I've ever read in a book. So yeah, make sure you comment down below what you want. I know I have asked on Instagram if people want to see an assumptions video, and so far everyone said yes. So if you want to see that as well, jump on over to my Instagram, which is just another social reject, and give me a follow, and then keep an eye out for when I ask for these assumptions, so that you can drop one and possibly be in the video as well. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below if you're interested in seeing the assumptions video, and then jump on over to my Instagram to watch out so that you can be a part of it when it comes up. And then hit subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, I will see you next week for another video. Stay you, stay awesome, never be afraid to be yourself, and don't forget to smile. Bye!